Welcome to the J&J Show. I'm Jeff, he's Jerry, and tonight we are going to go into part 9 of our Cryptid series. And in this one, we're going to focus on the more vicious side, I guess you could say, right, Jerry,
Yeah.
of Dogman in particular. And we've talked about how ridiculous that name is, but for lack of a better term, I guess that's what we'll stick with. But we always talk about these encounters, and we always talk about if they could attack, why don't they attack? If they could just overrun us all in the blink of an eye if they wanted to. But in this episode, we're actually going to talk about some documented attacks that all point to it being a cryptid that did the attack, Dogman more specifically. But the police and people involved always try to find, I guess they're trying to rationalize it, they're trying to make sense of it, but they always try to blame it on packs of wild dogs or something to that effect. And it's just I don't know, the guy who does it's a actually a Vic Cundiff episode, a couple of episodes that he did, and he's interviewing this guy, and he lays out all the cases and the evidence, and he talks about the investigations and everything. And it's pretty obvious if you're clued in on these things what it actually is. But I guess people don't want to believe, or they just refuse to believe, or I don't know. What do you think about that, Jerry?
I think the story is too hot to handle, to be perfectly honest. I think to me, what's more amazing than the possibility of there being hybrids out there, or monsters, if you will, is the fact that we have documented evidence that people are being mysteriously killed by something that is labeled an unknown canine creature. And yet the general public, for the most part, many of them are unaware, but others, when they hear about it, they're just like, oh, that's not a big deal. And that right there, I just cannot conceive of. It blows my mind. Even the missing 411, people hear about that and they're just, and they go on about their day, and they're completely unconcerned about the concept of people going missing. Well, in this case, we're not talking about missing. We're talking about cases where these creatures have, on several occasions, just this man mentions on this episode, have entered a house, killed, mutilated the owner, and then left. And then the authorities show up and blame the household dog, which is found cowering in a back room somewhere, or is also found dead. And there is, like you said, there seems to be this desire to just explain this whole thing away. The expression that David Paulides uses is local reports for local consumption. In other words, there is this feeling that we have to say something to make people feel better and to explain this away. And that is the beginning of what this isn't a conspiracy. This is something that's been ignored, and nobody looks into it because it's been successfully covered up.
Yeah, it's baffling how we talked about the UFO, and we talked about the what people describe as aliens, but obviously we don't think that they're really aliens from outer space. Actually, the evidence points to them being more toward interdimensional beings. But the cover up by the government on these UFOs since what, the 40s,
Yeah,
50s,
40s, yeah.
it's just, why wouldn't they try to cover this up as well? They try to cover up all the people who go missing in national parks too, because that's $1 billion a year industry. They don't want people to stop going to national parks, but people are going missing in national parks. But if they came right out and said, hey, we think there's Sasquatches or whatever else out there taking people, people aren't going to go, and they're going to lose their money. But they do the same thing with UFOs, so I don't, it's no surprise to me that they do the same thing here with this. Plus, a lot of people want to just dismiss cryptids, and like you said, they hear about it and they're like, oh, okay, and they go right back to doing what they were doing that day,
Yeah.
and it doesn't phase them at all. But I guess the truth is, I don't. It's almost like they treat us like we're stupid, like we can't handle. Uh, the you see in media or whatever, shows, movies, whatever, if a caveman is shown fire, they just jump back. They look at it. They're all mystified and they're all afraid and everything. I guess that's how they think we'll react if they just tell us the truth. But I don't know. Maybe they just don't want people living in fear because
Well, that,
they sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah. No, go ahead. That's fine.
Well, I was they mentioned several times in in these episodes. There's two episodes, and they mentioned several times Vic and his guest, I forget his name, that if you can't feel safe in your own home, where are you going to feel safe? And they mentioned that quite a few times. So maybe that's it. Maybe they think people can't handle it, and I'm these days. I don't think the majority of the people could handle a lot of stuff, but it's just
Yeah,
go ahead.
yeah. This is the situation that, as it stands, is that we have, uh, you know, the reality is we have thousands of reports every year of people encountering these forest giants. And to a lesser extent, we have other reports of people encountering these canine hybrid type creatures. Now, it's not as common as the Squatches, but like with Vic's show, was he up to 500 episodes now, 400 episodes, 400 or 500,
It's
either
getting up
whichever
there.
one that is, that's a lot. And in every one of these, he's interviewing somebody who's encountered or seen these beings. And if you start listening to these, you only have to get 4 or 5 in before you realize, okay, these people aren't making this up. So either they're all completely insane or they're seeing what they say they've seen. And interspersed in those episodes, you have this gentleman, and his name doesn't really matter because he only gives his first name, but he had been a government contractor and a high up government contractor and had gotten into researching this. And he's not the only one. There was another gentleman that does a podcast now that did some very good research on this very topic of canine hybrid attacks on humans. The problem is this channel, and I won't mention it. I guess I should, but I hate to because he's a nice enough guy, but he's kind of gone off the rails a little bit. And now his channel, it just seems to be making stuff up in order to get viewers. Whereas I know for a fact that he wasn't before because he was actually doing the hard research and had the news articles and was like this gentleman on Vic's show. He had the names, the dates, the reports, the quotes from officials. And that's what this gentleman goes through. 2 whole episodes for 2 hours. This guy goes through and documents going back to the 50s cases where people have mysteriously been killed by a creature that was blamed on, usually, like you said, local dogs. And the problem with this is that, and the expression that he uses that really sums this up is that sharks don't walk on land. And that's really critical. It's a critical statement because when you listen to what he reports here, these people who are found, and not all of them are found in their homes, most of them, some of them are, and it's disturbing. There are children that have been walking home from the bus stop. There are a lot of old lady, senior citizens who have been out collecting cans. A lot of these attacks occur either very early in the morning or toward dusk, which is typically when predators do like to attack. A lot of, and this is one key factor in this that I believe really shows that you're dealing with something that has intelligence. A lot of these attacks come against people who are into raising dogs. They're either dog breeders, or they run a kennel, or they try to reform juvenile or delinquent dogs. And these people end up being found horribly mutilated. And the researchers, the reporters, the people who show up, the investigators, are horrified by what they found. And they often compare it to the victim looks very much like what you see someone who's been attacked by a large white shark. In other words, they're not necessarily strictly normal dog bites. We're talking routinely that limbs are missing, all limbs in some cases are missing, and we're thinking of just catastrophic damage to the body. That's why I think they claim that these are packs of dogs, because the attacks are so bad that it can't be blamed on just one dog, because one dog's not capable of breaking somebody's femur and running off with the leg. And what's even worse is in some of the attacks that occur in houses, the house is there's been a great sign of struggle. The house is trashed, furniture is knocked over, things are broken, and yet the dog that they blame doesn't have a mark on it, not a scratch, not a bruise, not a bloody spot. So this dog has managed to take down, in some cases, a grown man, destroy the house in the fight, and not get so much as must in the process. How is that possible? And this happens over and over. So the bottom line here seems to be that something that's doing this is covering its tracks. I don't want to hog all the time because there's so much here in the details that I have just a little bit of notes and whatnot. And also what's interesting about this is since these two videos were done on Vic's channel, and I think he did it like 2017, there have been two very significant attacks that fall exactly into this paradigm. That one of them is in your state, but is closer to my house. And it's a typical attack that I can give the details on. We may have mentioned it once before on here. I can't remember, but I just don't think this is something where we can just mention it once and then move on to something else, because this is a major, massive story that nobody ever talks about. People want to go to the movies and watch these ridiculous movies about these fantasy superheroes that never existed, or they go to horror movies because they want to be scared. And here they got a real horror movie going on out and like we said, most people are never going to encounter this thing. You ought not to be terrified or afraid, because the vast majority of people will never be attacked by one of these things. But I do agree with the gentleman that if you have small kids, do not leave them out in the backyard playing by themselves unsupervised.
As long as it's closer to your house that happened in my state, that's fine. I just want to say that. Another thing about these crime scenes is that not only do reporters and local police show up, but the FBI show up routinely, time and time again at these crime scenes. And why is the FBI showing up if it's just a bunch of local dogs? And there have been stories before about the Men in Black or the FBI showing up in different situations where cryptids or aliens are thought to be involved, but they just try to dismiss it with a quote unquote logical explanation that I guess they think people will believe. Like, this person was attacked by their dog, except the dog had no blood on it, like you mentioned. And another thing that Vic and the guy say is that no human remains are found in the dog's stomach.
Right.
So the dog managed to attack its owner, not get any blood on it, and where the parts that have been eaten or whatever, it's not in the dog. So it doesn't make sense. And you mentioned, but I wanted to touch on this, is that it's usually they pick off, it seems like, the weakest when they're hunting. And this happens to small children, unfortunately. It happens to elderly people. And then they've mentioned people who are in between these ages that are usually 20 to 40, but they're inebriated in some way. They're either drunk, or they're on drugs, or any other way you can think to become inebriated. But it's almost like they're picking off those that are weak, that they know they can get away with, that they know. I guess it's the predator thing in them. Predators will pick off the weakest in the herd. So they pick a target, they see it, they don't think that they'll put up a fight, I guess. If they're too young or too old, they definitely won't be able to. And honestly, as strong as these things are said to be, I don't think anybody could put up a fight. But when they're drunk or high on drugs, it makes them easier to take down. And another thing they mention, like you said, they attack at dusk or dawn. usually, and nobody ever hears anything. You would think if a pack of wild dogs, which is usually what they blame it on, was attacking somebody, somebody would hear something. They don't hear any dogs. They don't hear any growling or biting or barking or anything. They don't hear the victim scream. People turn their back on their children for 5 to 10 minutes. Never hear a sound. Kid's gone and has been badly mutilated. They don't hear anything. You think the older people, you would think that people would scream, that people would hear the screams. Now there was the one case where the lady who did she did house dogs that I guess it was a rehabilitation
Mhm.
place for dogs, and the neighbors did hear something, and they did show up. And they did say they saw large, big-headed dogs attacking her, but the pit bulls were blamed in the end.
Right.
And large, big-headed dogs. What does that sound like? That's usually how people describe Dogman as sounding. But
Yep.
a lot of them are people who they believe, and this is the guy who looked into all these cases in Vic. They believe that the predator, Dogman, whatever you think it might be, is actually trying to get to their pet dog, and then the person steps in to try to protect their dog, and then that's when they're attacked as well. There have been some cases that look like that's happened. Sorry, and these they happen usually more in the south, farther south than us, thankfully. But like you said, there are some that have happened around here, but usually they're in like states like Mississippi or Louisiana or down south, places like that. Are a couple of the places I think he mentioned in the video. I know he mentioned Mississippi, but it's just bizarre that people are there 1 second and without a sound, without a trace, without any evidence whatsoever other than what's found at the crime scene with and it's always canine footprints, canine hair, DNA are found. The like you said, it looks like a great white attacked these people. It looks like shark attacks. That's the closest thing they can come to describe the injuries and the wounds on these people are is comparing it to a shark attack. And neighborhood dogs don't do that. Domesticated animals won't do that. Even a pack of dogs wouldn't be able to replicate a shark attack. So and then you have Dogman who's described as having a big head. They're usually said to be like 7 to 8 feet tall. Big heads, big mouths, huge teeth, huge claws. So that would be the one thing I would think of would be the closest to being able to replicate a shark attack.
Oh, there is no doubt about that. They have, and that's part of what gives it away is that these things, there's a tendency now for people to, and even people who are that we tend to listen to and respect on this have kind of gone out and they're starting to say now, well, there's no evidence that these cryptids, like squatches, and that they attack anybody. Well, first of all, there is, but you have to look for it. It's not announced by the government, nor, I mean, I would think that would be a given that you would know that there's no confirmed. I mean, who would have confirmed it? And second of all, when people get attacked by these things, they're not likely to survive. These are creatures that everyone who sees them says that that these things completely and totally outclass us in their abilities. So we do have a few cases, however. One of them was in Lynchburg, Virginia, that he mentions, where the kids were out in the woods playing and the father heard screaming. And in this case, it actually has a fairly happy ending. He runs out into the woods with a rake, thinking, no telling what could be happening. And he gets out there, and unfortunately, one of the kids is being attacked by one of these things. But you find, and he's able to use a rake to drive it off. There's actually a couple of them, he said, and the kids they may have been injured, but none of the children were killed. But you can see with him and others, there is this confusion where he's trying to describe exactly what it was. He doesn't want to come across as a kook, but yet clearly these were not normal dogs. And there was indeed a pack of them. That makes Vic and the gentleman theorize that some of these cases could be juveniles that are attacking people, especially when there's appears to be several of them, like in this case. But in the instances where they have kicked down the front door of a house and gone inside, you're probably talking about the mature adults in that situation. And we just don't know. We don't know what we don't know, and we can't assume that, are these beings doing this for food reasons? Because clearly in a lot of these reports, they indicate that the victim was eaten, largely, not completely, but to a great extent. But yet we know that cryptids do things just out of meanness at times. So, and that's not to say that all these creatures do this, because we know from Vic's show that a great many times they could kill somebody in these sightings. Almost every time they could, and they don't. Now, a lot of people interpret that to say, well, see, that means that they're nice and they want to be friends with us. It doesn't mean that at all. We see even Steve, who I have to mention once per episode, seems to admit that there seems to be something holding these beings back. They don't seem to be at liberty to do whatever they want to humans. There seems to be a permission that they have to get, or something that has to be done. One of the most recent episodes on Vic's channel, which, in case we haven't mentioned, is Dogman Encounters Radio, the one he did just last Friday, the lady looked out the window, and this was in Asheville, North Carolina, and she looks out the window and sees this dog man running across her driveway, and it sees her, and she says the expression on its face was one of complete surprise, like, oh crap, she's seen me, she saw me. And we've heard that before with squatches, where these cryptids, you can tell they're not supposed to be seen, in only certain circumstances does it seem that they're allowed. And of course, we have a certain view on that they're not supposed to reveal themselves, because when they reveal themselves, and this is part of the reason I think the government comes on board, when they reveal themselves, the jig will be up, and people will realize that, okay, what they've told us about mankind and this existence and evolution is all a crock, and instead this is what's been going on. So that was my mouthful for right now.
Yeah, like we'll I should have mentioned this earlier, but we'll put the links to the two episodes that we're talking about. I think it's episodes 90 and 91. We'll put the links in the description if you want to go listen to those, but be warned, it is graphic and it's not for the weak at heart. So probably should have put a disclaimer on this episode too. But what you just mentioned about them being held back, it all points to, and these attacks is the point I had just written down that I wanted to make, and that leads perfectly into it, that we believe they're evil, especially Dogman. They seem to get the sick pleasure of just instilling fear in people, and it's just a delight for them to be able to cause that fear. So, and every encounter I've heard of with the Dogman, I'd say 99 out of 100, 98 out of 100 that I hear, they are said to just feel pure evil. They're just pure evil, and the hatred, excuse me, the hatred in which they emanate when they're looking at humans, that the people describe feeling from these creatures, it all points to them being evil, and it all points to them being on the enemy team. In our last episode, we talked about a man who died and went to hell, who came back, fortunately, and he had a near-death experience. He went to hell, and he described creatures that looked just like cryptids. And he described creatures with glowing eyes, and they look like bears and gorillas, which I think Sasquatch. But he didn't describe Dogman directly, but he did describe beings with glowing eyes, and Dogman in a lot of encounters, they're described as having glowing red, glowing yellow eyes. And that, to me, it really, that his description of hell and the creatures there that he saw, the demons, just solidified that that's where the cryptids come from. And we talked about that a bit in the last episode too, that they come to this dimension from another dimension, or behind the veil, or however you want to put it. And I think that's where they're at. I think they're there. And it's mentioned, and I mention this every time we talk about cryptids, so I'll go ahead and mention it again. In Revelation, it talks about the veil. It doesn't directly say the veil, but it talks about a veil being lifted and these creatures running amok on Earth. And I think that's what they are, the cryptids. We've mentioned this before too. C.W. Lewis, Chronicles of Narnia, I think he had it right when he depicted the witch's army as a bunch of creatures that are pretty much just beasts walking up on two legs, like most of these cryptids are said to be. But we just think that they're evil. We think that the Book of Enoch describes perfectly where they come from, how they were created. That was all before the flood, but somehow I don't know that any of them survived the flood, but people maybe after the flood figured out how to, because the fallen angels who taught these people these things were still around as far as I know, right after the flood. So,
Well,
or
yeah,
were they killed too? Or
a whole bunch of them are still around. The 200 that had come down on Mount Hermon were chained in pits of darkness, but the original batch that rebelled with Satan were still free on the earth, and they still are to this day.
and so that would be, Enoch. Correct me if I'm wrong here. Talks about the people learning things from these fallen angels, and that was
Yeah.
one of the things, genetic mutations. So if they're still around after the flood, then obviously somebody figured out how to do it since then, and they've been depicted throughout history in the Egyptian hieroglyphics and werewolf stories from the Middle Ages, and they've I just they're evil. They're on the enemy team as far as I'm concerned, and like you said, they're being held back by something. But for some reason, every now and then, they're allowed to, or they defy that, or they're allowed to, or I don't know. I don't know how that works. I don't even want to try to understand how that works. But for whatever reason, these people are being attacked, and it is. I mean, it's pretty obvious to us what it is because these reports are flimsy. The excuses they give are flimsy at best.
Yeah, it seems like they're allowed to kill as long as they don't go to the extent where, just like with the 411, David Paulides mentions that if you look at these disappearances, they occur every 30 years. And the same thing with these attacks. We're not portraying here that people in every neighborhood are being attacked by these things and that this is happening every year. It's not. You have clumps that occur. Clearly, there was a big clump of them that occurred in the 60s. And then there doesn't seem to, they seem to be one-offs, one here, one there, different parts of the country, different parts of the world, different years. They're separated by different years. It's not something where this isn't like UFO sightings where they're happening just about every week somewhere. This is much more rare. But nevertheless, this guy has put together, he's done extremely good work. I think the reason why he's not has written a book, he's not making any money off of this. When you listen to the guy, I don't know if he has a PhD, or if he had his master's, but I tell you what it was, he passed the bar. He's an attorney. And so he knows how to do research. He knows how to make an argument. And it's just very interesting. You listen to this guy, he's not making the stuff up. He's pretty well reserved, but he has found these, and I believe it because this has happened. Like I said, I'll talk about here in a minute. It's happened twice since these episodes were done. Now, I'm not saying it's only happened twice because I don't know every time that it's here, but twice it has hit the news and it's been reported in the same way that he describes. I mean, for example, in one of the cases in the 60s where somebody was killed by one of these things, the investigators came and they looked at it, and out of the investigation, there was a posse of over 100 armed men that was formed and went out into the countryside. The locals were told not to go out because there was an unknown predator in the area. And this armed posse, very large, went out into the countryside to try to find this dog, just a regular cur dog. That seems like massive overkill to do something like that. And so you find that what the authorities claim, what they say, and then how they respond are not in line with each other. They're claiming no need to worry, just a pack of wild dogs, and then they're sending out these large groups of armed men to go at the countryside. And by the way, these men never find. Now, in some cases, they do go around and just shoot stray dogs in order to have, but they refuse to do autopsies on the, or should say, what's not autopsy, like you said, they refuse to investigate the contents of their stomach, because it's much easier to shoot these dogs and say, well, this is the dog that did it. And a lot of times the locals are eager to get that, and so they just accept it, and everybody goes on about their lives. This case here in North Carolina that occurred, however, the locals weren't that easily appeased. I guess they got a little bit more sand in their craw about it, and so they kind of pushed back a little bit. And it's fairly interesting. And then the other case that I was going to mention is not real long, but it occurred in Kentucky, which, Kentucky is known for dogman sightings. And this one here in North Carolina is just right down the road, maybe 10 minutes down the road, 15 minutes from one of the most famous dogman sightings in North Carolina. So you have, how many things do you have to have that that bring together? How many pieces of evidence before you begin to see the puzzle that there's a connection here with some of this stuff? A lot of these attacks occur on reservations. And as we know, reservations are hotbeds for whatever reason. Reservation, if you want to see a cryptid, first place to go is to reservation, although I don't think you're supposed to be there. But for those who are on, they report cryptids all the time. And it's very, very common. And same thing with a lot of these attacks he mentions are on the Wind River Reservation or any number of other reservations. So there's just a lot more to this story, but you have to dig for it. It's not National Geographic's not going to do a special on this. Nobody's going to do a special on this because it crosses the line too much.
Absolutely. And actually, now that you mentioned reservations, I was thinking one thing when they were talking about the attacks that happened on reservations. They didn't say if they were Navajo or not, and Skinwalkers are associated with Navajo people, but Skinwalkers are usually seen as giant coyotes, like bigger than normal coyotes. And that would leave canine DNA behind. That would leave the necessary footprints and stuff behind, the evidence behind to point it toward a dog or a canine. And part of becoming a skinwalker, from what I've gathered and listening to the stories and doing the research, is that you have to kill somebody. And it's part of the shaman's way it's one of the steps that you have to take to become one. So I'm not saying that the reservation thing and the canine thing made me think that maybe on the reservations it's skinwalkers. But as far as like Kentucky or here in North Carolina, that to me is Dogman. But it's funny you mentioned that the people in North Carolina weren't easily satisfied. We're known for our stubbornness and for our we once rough talked a hurricane that was heading toward the state. We rough talked that into changing course, and it did. So a few years ago, that was the running joke online after it changed course, after everybody was posting online about confronting it and stuff, that we made a hurricane back down. So there's a reason why North Carolinians weren't so easily swayed into believing the logical explanations. So, but yeah, that's all I wanted to mention about the reservations and the skinwalkers. But to me, it very well could have been a dogman for whatever reason. Like you said, reservations are hot spots for all kinds of different activity, not just cryptids, but paranormal too. And they have their superstitions, they have their legends and their lores, and they believe them, because if you go, first of all, they won't even talk about skinwalkers with outsiders. Second of all, this from the stories I've heard online written by Native American people, they won't talk about skinwalkers. They won't even say the word for fear of attracting one on a reservation. Because outsiders have gone with Navajo people to reservations, their friends or significant others, whatever, and they've asked the families about skinwalkers, and they tell them not to say that word, not to talk about it, and they will not discuss it. So they firmly believe that these things are out there and that they exist, and that they're I thought that might be one possible explanation for these attacks that are, and they're described the same way as the Dogman attacks elsewhere. But a supernatural paranormal coyote that's larger than normal is how they're normally described, I would probably have the strength to replicate a what's similar to a shark attack.
The two incidences, I wasn't going to give a tremendous number of details, but just to give people an idea of two that occurred. I won't say recently because these two occurred within about a year of each other, from 2019 to 2020. And the first one occurred in a little town called Pandago, outside of a little town named Belhaven, North Carolina. And this is in the extreme portion of North Carolina on the western coast of the Pamlico Sound. It's very much farm country. It's so rural that they actually have tried to introduce red wolves back into the area. It's very remote. I've spent a lot of time down there myself fishing, type place where you have to really keep an eye on your fuel gauge because the gas stations are not on every corner. You can go down there and spend a week and hit one stoplight. It's really a nice area. People are very friendly. But in February of 2019, Mrs. Brenda Hamilton, who was in her 70s, was a librarian at a local school, private school in the area, was walking her dogs as she did every morning. She had a couple dogs. I think she had maybe one that was hers and then two that were just kind of like neighborhood dogs or the neighbor's dogs, but she was familiar with them. And she would go walking early. Apparently this was before she would go to the school. And one morning she didn't return. Now this is against the backdrop of the locals having said that there had been reports from some of the folks in the neighborhood. I say neighborhood, this was like a gathering of houses out in the middle of the country, that there had been a large, strange looking dog reported in the area. And there had also been some strange footprints found in the area. That morning, she did not return from the walk, and her husband became concerned and went out looking for Brenda, and she was found in a ditch. And the ditches down there are they're almost like small canals because the area is so flat. It's not below sea level, but it's very flat, and it floods very easily during hurricanes. And she was found in a ditch that had a lot of water in it. She was floating. She was not yet deceased, but she wasn't far from it and died. I can't remember if it was on the way to the hospital or shortly after getting to the hospital. She had had massive wounds to the body that were consistent with some sort of a vicious attack. And immediately there was an investigation done. And throughout, if you go and look at the news articles on this, the local investigators are at odds with the federal investigators. And yes, I said federal investigators because they showed up and involved themselves in this, which you would wonder why that would be the case if this was just a neighborhood dog, because right away they went to blaming those two dogs that were with her. They were found nearby when she was discovered. And apparently one or both of them had blood on their mouths. And this is something that happens quite a bit. A dog is found, and since it has blood on the mouth, it's assumed, well, this dog clearly attacked this woman. But apparently what had happened with this case is the dog simply had been licking the woman after the predator had left. As dogs are wont to do, the dog was almost trying to care for in any way it could for this woman that they were familiar with. And this has happened in several cases. One I think about in particular is the gentleman who was found in his house torn apart, and one of his dogs was hiding in the back, and the other one was laying beside his body and had blood on its mouth where it had been licking the owner. And they immediately said, well, see, clearly this is the dog that destroyed this man and tore him up. So they put the dog down. But this case, it didn't go away that easy because the locals said, we don't believe that dog did it. I guess stomachs were pumped. Nothing of the woman was found in the dogs. And the DNA study was done, and it came back as an unknown canine. And so the locals, in this case, the game commission, seemed to be willing to tell the public, because the public in this situation was not buying the whole idea that this woman was attacked by these neighborhood dogs that everybody knew. And she was very well liked in the neighborhood. This is somebody that was well known. It's a small community. And So they did their own study, and this is the one that turned up that it was an unknown, the DNA, an unknown canine, unknown predator. And that's when, shortly thereafter, the FBI came down to this area and took the study results that the locals had done and carried them off. And they've been gone ever since. And so, as with happened in other cases, about 6 months later, the federal government came out and said that the studies showed that it was just local dogs that had killed this woman. And this case was actually covered on Fox News. It made got national attention. There were also some local trackers that were on hand that were with animal control, said that there were large dog-like tracks of an unknown canine were found on the site. And this is something that you see quite a bit of, where individuals are found. Several of the Native Americans that were killed, I say killed, but they were found basically on the edge of death, but still alive. This seems to be a common pattern. I don't know why that is, but right when the predator seems to be able to finish the person off, it departs. And so this is followed about a year later by an equally disturbing story in Kentucky, where a 13-year-old boy, and his name was Corey Godsey. You get the impression that this was in somewhat of a mountainous area, or hilly area at least, as most of Kentucky seems to be. And he was out in his backyard playing, and until he wasn't. And when his family called, investigators or called the authorities, they showed up. And all the newspaper reports say that the authorities were led up a mountain. It doesn't say who led them up a mountain, but I get the impression that the family probably walked with the authorities in a brief search and found the boy up on a mountain. And he had been carried up this mountain, for one thing, and had been severely maimed and mauled. And there were even some reports early on, although I can't confirm these, that he was actually found in a tree. I don't know if that was the case or not. There was some of these things you have to really guard against rumors. And then other times there are things that are fact that are hushed up because they go against the established narrative. So some of these cases, you really, as if you're trying to get the truth, that you're kind of behind the eight ball, because you really don't know, was that true or was that just, something that was made up. But anyhow, they said they were going to do a study, a DNA study. And so they did. They said it would take just a couple weeks. This was also in the month of February of 2020, a year later after the Hamilton attack. And it took them until August to complete the study. I don't know what was going on, what the delay was, but then they just came out and said it was a pack of wild dogs. That's all there is to see here. Nothing more was said. Oh, okay, wild dogs. Grabbed the boy, 13 years old, and drug him up the side of a mountain and tore him up really, really bad. And so again, it's local reports for local consumption. In this case, though, it was the feds again that were stepping into. It's just amazing that feds get involved in an attack on somebody by local packs of dogs. You wouldn't think that would be something that would draw federal attention, but you could see maybe if it was on a federal, if it was in a national park, maybe, yeah, but just some neighborhood in Kentucky, why were the feds involved? So, and these are just two that I'm aware of. And there was a lot said about that at the time. It was blamed on perhaps a mountain lion had done it, or a coyote had done it. But the fact that he was out back and that something had set upon him and then drug him off matches all of the other. And here's the other thing too, Jeff, and I'll shut up. I'm no hunter. I'm not into hunting, but I am familiar with the outdoors. I'm not familiar with large packs of wild dogs. And I know that dogs do attack people in this country every year. Dogs do kill people in this country every year. And that there are wild dogs that are out in the countryside. But no time do we ever have a case where they locate one of these large packs of wild dogs and wipe them out. And we're able to see a photograph. Here is a small field filled with the dogs that we all just shot down. That never happens. To where these packs of wild dogs are almost as mythical as elusive as the dog man himself. And I would I would wager that one's as difficult to find as the other at this point. But it's just easier to accept. Okay, well, these are just wild dogs, even though nobody's ever really seen them, and they get the blame on reservations a lot too, because reservations do have a lot of stray dogs. They're not necessarily wild because dogs don't do very well living. Cats can live pretty well out on their own. Dogs don't do very well. Coyotes and wolves do, but your average regular dogs, canines that we have as pets, you turn them loose in the wood, they don't do very well. That's not their thing. They need to be fed. And so those are the two that I wanted to mention that have happened since Vic Cundiff's 2 episodes.
Yeah, that's just as baffling as these cases is that they blame these wild dogs that if they're that large of a pack of wild dogs running around, they can tear somebody up that badly. People would see it. And I think in a lot of those stories, I may be mistaken, but the people around where they happen say they've never seen a pack of wild dogs.
Right.
There's
Right.
Yeah, like you said, if there's that big of a pack of wild dogs that can do that to a person, you'd see them. They would be known. The people living in these areas would know about this pack of wild dogs. So to me, it's just another flimsy excuse to try to cover it up. So it's not a coincidence at all to me that these feds show up in a backwater North Carolina town for a lady who was attacked by wild dogs. Why are they there? Why do they show up? Why do they take interest? It's just a pack of wild dogs. Or in that case, her pet who attacked her. I'm glad the dog was eventually exonerated, but it's crazy to me to think that they throw out these flimsy excuses and they expect people to believe it and take it as fact, especially when they do their own study and find that it was unknown canine and unknown predator. Trackers see large canine footprints that they can't identify at the scene. These are professional trackers. They know what they're talking about. They have credibility. It's not like they're just somebody who me or you walks out and sees a footprint. Gee, I wonder what that is. That was something I've never seen before. So I don't know. It's just they expect people to buy it, and I'm glad the people, especially in North Carolina, my fellow North Carolinians, they didn't have the wool pulled over their eyes so easily. But it's terrible what happened. Especially, I honestly those episodes are hard to listen to, especially when they're talking about the young children who get taken, and that's another thing. A pack of wild dogs, I think, would attack indiscriminately. They would attack anybody and everybody if they were attacking people.
Right.
These attacks that they describe in these episodes that they talk about this, they seem intentional. They seem like the victims, unfortunately, they seem like they were chosen specifically by whatever it was. If you don't want to believe it was a dog man, these attacks are happening, then I believe it's a dog man, so I'm gonna say dog man. But these dog men, they're picking these people specifically, and they say because they think it's like the weakest of the herd, and they could probably take a child easily. They could take an elderly person easily. They could take somebody who's drunk or high on drugs easily. And even if they don't kill them, who's going to believe a drunk or a drug addict? Who's going to believe a small child? That's why I think in a lot of these stories where children go missing, not to try to change the subject or anything, but there are stories where small children go missing and they're found, and they say, well, I lived with a bear for 3 days. The bear took care of me. The bear gave me food. But in reality, they're probably talking about a Sasquatch, but who's going to believe a small child? Elderly person. They could just chalk it up to them being senile or whatever. And I'm not saying that dogmen are like looking at people in a neighborhood. They're like sitting back at the edge of the forest in the pack and they're like, hey, what about that one? No, they'd be able to tell, what about this one? Maybe they do, but I think it's just that animalistic predatory instinct that they have to pick off the weaker ones of the herd. And they do have intelligence, though. It's been well documented that these things are intelligent. I think some have even communicated through mind speak.
Oh
Uh,
yeah,
they um, so and another thing that they talk about are people they think are sometimes lured out of their homes. That one girl
yes,
that they talked about who
yeah,
said they early in the morning she snuck out to see her boyfriend, but she was in her home and for whatever reason she snuck out and went outside and was found in the ditch outside her home. I believe I think it was right
yeah,
outside. Nobody
yep.
ever heard a thing, and they think that maybe something lured her out there. Maybe that's what they're doing. Maybe they're luring people out into the woods, but I think they just they know the targets they're picking. It's intentional and it has intent, for lack of a better word.
We know that's happening. Um, that we have that reported with squatches and dogmen on numerous occasions where people have said that they've intercepted their kids leaving the house in the middle of the night and asked them, where are you going? Or I'm going out to see the doggies, or I'm going out to play with the furry man. And there have been people who have not gone out, who as kids were lured and didn't respond, and later reported this is what they were saying, come on out, and I just refused to do it. We know that these beings on occasion are trying to lure people out of the house, kids. And there have been some adults as well, but mostly kids, trying to get them to come out. And apparently some of them do, in this case like you're talking about, and they're found within 100 yards. In that case I think it was just a couple hundred feet from the front door, and the child was deceased.
Yeah, and this is a teenage girl. I think she was
Yeah,
what 15, something like
I think
that,
so.
around that age. But yeah, like you said, they talk about going out to see the dog or the hairy man or the bear or something to that effect. And
Yeah,
sometimes there's a couple of stories that come to mind where they're at the window and the parent walks in like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "Oh, I'm talking to the bear or whatever." And they're like, "What are you talking about?" And then they just chalk it up to a child's imagination, and the child's talking nonsense because it's a child, and it's not making any sense. But for and it would be easy, I guess, to lure a child into the woods rather than an adult who's like, "This is weird. I'm not doing that."
right.
And they probably appear to be friendly. They act friendly. They give no indication that they mean ill intent. And then, of course, the elderly, I don't think they'd be lured into the woods, but they're easily set upon because they're older, they're weaker, they're frail, and they just make easy targets. So
Then we have the Native Americans who have a long history of warning us, the white eyes, that is, to be careful because the Squatches, they love to take snatch kids. Well, what are the chances that we have these reports of these things behaving this manner? And it lines up exactly with what American Indians have said. That's one of the reasons they claim they didn't go out much at nighttime. They stayed in their lodges at night, was because these things were out there and they didn't want to interact with them. So it's one of those things. If you're not familiar with these subjects, it's easy to ignore it all and think it's all nonsense. But once you've listened to enough, like Jeff and I have, and you realize that these things all come together and that one thing corroborates another. The fact that American Indians have long said that these beings love to snatch kids. Here we have all these cases where kids are being snatched. I don't know. Could there be a connection there? I would tend to think so. But if, like we said before, if you're more concerned with who's playing on Monday Night Football or what Taylor Swift is going to be singing at the halftime show, then you don't be bothered with this kind of stuff. And it's not pleasant, but for us, we're looking for the Lord's appearing, and we know that the world is not a nice place, and that ignorance is maybe bliss, but it's just that, it's ignorance. And I don't think people should live in fear with this. But if you have young kids, I know one thing: if I ever have grandkids, I'm not letting them play out in the back in the woods without being observed every single second. That's just a fact. I mean, there's no way they're going to be out back. I'm going to be out there watching, and they're not. I'm not. If I have to go in and get something, they're coming in and getting something with me, because that's always when these kids disappear. The people say that I just went in to get lemonade. I just went in to get. I came back and they were gone. Over and over and over.
Well, I think you have good reason to feel like that because you've had activity behind your home. We've actually talked about it in one of the parts of this series. You talked about all the potential Sasquatch activity around your home and in the area where you live. So I don't blame you one bit for taking that stance. That one famous case, what's the kid's name? It happened back in the 50s or 60s. They were in the national.
Dennis Martin.
That's it, Dennis Martin. He went behind a bush, and his dad. They were playing hide and seek. He went behind the bush. His dad was waiting for him to come out. Kept waiting, never did, and hikers coming down a mountain thought they saw what looked like an upright bear with something over its shoulder running from tree to tree. That's Sasquatch, but who's to say that the other ones don't do it too? I mean, obviously, dogmen are snatching children out of their yards. They're snatching them out of the in broad daylight after they get off the school bus. That was one of the more disturbing ones. Was
Yes, it was.
the little girl who got off the school bus and they found her later.
Yeah.
Just terrible. But for whatever reason, that's and some of these children that the Sasquatch take are never seen again. Some theorize that they might take them to live with them, but after hearing these stories, I don't know.
Yeah, it seems to everybody has their theories about it. I tend to think that, of all the people who go missing, because this is not and a couple times in these episodes they compare it to the 411, and in some cases I do think that it's similar to 411, but it's not a dead-on match. I think some 411 cases are what we're talking about here. They are dogman attacks, but what we're discussing here is it's not the same thing, because in these cases the victim is almost always found, and they're found in a relatively recent state of mutilation, and it has not been long. That almost never happens in missing 411 cases. Usually the person is not found. That's why they're missing. If they are found, usually they're not torn up at all. The only time they find where violence has been done to the body is if they're found years later. And there's only one or two cases I can think of in missing 411 where they find the missing person and they're torn up. So this is probably being done by the same entities that cause 411, but this is distinct and separate from the missing 411 phenomenon.
I think it's hunting.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I
think you hit it nail on the head when you said that they're watching. They are. I believe they know the patterns. They knew this woman went for a walk every morning. One morning they talked the Brenda Hamilton I'm talking about, the woman who was killed, that went out and gathered cans. They knew that she had gone every morning. This was a separate case from Brenda Hamilton, but very similar. Older ladies going out early in the morning for walks in a rural area. I do believe that they watch and they know and they learn habits, and then that just makes it all the easier for them. In this area where Brenda Hamilton was killed, I can tell you could see a long distance in any direction, and they know that they have enough time to carry out the attack and not be seen because of how rural it is. There's very few people, and you can see, okay, there's nobody around. You can pounce on somebody with the strength and the weapons they have. They can tear somebody apart, be done in less than 30 seconds and gone. And so it's not hard to picture this happening at all.
No, I think that's why it happens so much in national parks. Because there's so much cover, there's so much wide open area where there's just nothing. A couple of cases where the people talk about their kids, they found them in like a almost hypnotic state, and they're going outside to play with the dog or the hairy man or whatever they say. There was a couple of cases that happened here in western North Carolina, right on the Tennessee border. I've talked about this on this channel before too, where a little boy and a man went missing at the same time for about a week, and then they both showed up just fine. And the boy walked down the trail, went around the corner, and he disappeared. And luckily, he was found. But they both described going to a cabin. That has nothing to do with the point I'm trying to make. The man was with a group of people. I believe it was fall because it was going to be chilly out. He was sitting around with his friends with a shirt off during the day. I think he had jeans on. I think he was barefoot too. And all of a sudden, he just stood up and started walking into the woods. And his friends were like, "Hey, where are you going?" And they started calling his name, and he didn't respond to anything. It was almost like he was in a hypnotic state, and he just walked right off into the woods. And they were yelling at him. They followed him to the edge of the woods and were yelling until they couldn't see him anymore. They were yelling his name, and he didn't respond to any of it. And he disappeared. And luckily, he was also found. And they both saw this cabin that was not there and that does not exist, and that the park rangers gave the layout of the park they were in, and there's no cabin there. But that has nothing to do with the story, with what I'm talking about here. But he was in a hypnotic state. So, and other people, we've talked about this before too. They'll be on a trail, they'll see a Sasquatch. Next thing they know, they're walking out of the trail at the trailhead where they were, and they're back at their car, and they don't remember how they got there.
Right.
So they have the ability not only to mind speak, which points to them being supernatural, but they have the ability to alter our way of thinking or put us in, I guess the best way to describe it would be a hypnotic state to control us,
Right.
to lure us out. And it's not even luring at that point. It's just like a Pied Piper leading them out, leading people out into the woods. But I think with some of these children that they're talking about, it's more persuasion than that. That could
Right.
be part of it, but I think they're being persuaded, and they're appearing friendly. And these children see this big stuffed creature that looks like their dog or that looks like a teddy bear, and they, oh, I want to go play with it. You know how kids are; they have all
Right.
kinds of imaginary friends and stuff, and I don't know. They see these things and they're just lured out, and it's like they say, it's kind of a frightening thought to think that you might not be safe in your own home, but it
Well,
happens.
like we said from day one on this channel, there are lots of people in this country, in North America, that are visited by these things, and they're regularly, and that is something that's not all that rare. The attacks are rare, but the fact that people living in rural areas are having regular visits from cryptids that are, and a lot of times no, there's no attack involved. It's throwing rocks on the roof, it's tapping on the windows, it's turning doorknobs, looking in the windows, messing around with stuff in the yard, making sounds, walking on the roof, things like this, making a nuisance of themselves, basically. But that type of thing is happening a lot. And I mean a lot. But most people don't report it because they don't want to be ridiculed and called insane.
And dogmen are notorious for looking in windows, for
Yeah.
tapping on windows, for scratching on the
Mhm.
sides of homes, all of that. They are notorious for doing that. And also, talking about reservations and skinwalkers, same thing. They are notorious for looking in windows, scratching on the sides of the homes, making noises outside, trying to lure people out, walking on a lot. I see a lot of those in skinwalker stories, walking on the roof. They describe whatever's out there as they hear it walking up on the roof. So that just points to me to like these things. They're obviously infatuated with us,
Right.
especially Dogman. I don't know if they just curious as to where we live and how we live, and that's why they look inside. But I don't think there's any innocent uh, intentions when it comes to that. I don't think they're just curious and they're just looking in. I think they're curious for a more menacing reason
Right.
than just wanting to see. Oh well, they live in a house. I'd like to see what's inside there. I don't think that's it at all. I think I don't want to say they're always on the hunt, but when they are, maybe that's why they're looking in windows and tapping on glasses or glasses, tapping on looking in and tapping on windows and stuff like that. But that's all I had for this one. Did you have anything else you wanted to add before we?
No, I mean, there's a lot more to this. We're just scratching the surface as usual. That I don't claim for this to be a comprehensive at all. This is just to let people know that this is occurring. It's very interesting. It's very disturbing to some respect. I don't feel any fear over it because the Lord is Lord over all. But it's you need to learn and take some precautions as well that this type of stuff is going on.
And I think it just all ties into imminent return of Jesus.
Right.
It's
Yep.
veil's starting to thin, and we're starting to see things that we're not meant to see, not supposed to see. And like you said, the look of surprise that on that dog man's face when that woman saw it. Uh, I don't think sometimes they do want to be seen though. So it's really fascinating to discuss and to theorize why they do the things they do, and sometimes they do attack. Sometimes they, most of the time they don't. Majority of the time, the overwhelming majority of the time, they don't. Like you said, these are very rare occurrences. They don't happen very often. So, but they do happen sometimes, and we thought it was enough to at least talk about on here and to shed light on it, which is what we try to do on this channel. We don't do it for the views or the likes or to try to get as many subscribers as possible. We talk about things that we feel like things that we feel that Christians don't normally talk about. And this is definitely one of those topics that most Christians shy away from. They don't want to talk about it, but we believe that it's all connected. We believe the Book of Enoch had it right, and we think these creatures are the result of the genetic mutations, because what they describe in that, what Enoch describes in his book, match pretty much things that people are seeing today. The man who died and went to hell, he described things, especially reptilian creatures. People are seeing those, and we think they're all evil and play for the same team, and we think it's enough to talk about. And we'll probably be back with this was part 9. We'll probably be back with a part 10 and so on, because this is one of our favorite topics to talk about, and this is something we knew when we started this channel we'd be talking about a lot. But it's just fascinating when you start to tie it all back into the Book of Enoch, to the Bible, and then to what Jesus says in Revelation about the end and how evil will be able to run amok on earth. They mention creatures, don't they, Jerry, in Revelation?
Yeah.
That creatures will
wild beasts,
that's it, will overtake mankind in their homes too. And it says in their homes, right?
It says it doesn't specifically say in the homes, but it does allude to the fact that there will be people being killed by these things in the end, by wild beasts.
Right.
And we don't have enough tigers and lions running around to do that. So something's got to fill that void.
And like you said, sharks don't grow legs and come up on the land, and that's the closest comparison they can come to describing it. But
this is where the rubber meets the road. I mean, this stuff is happening, and it has happened. So if people want to say, well, I don't believe this, that's fine. The evidence is there. We've laid it out. There's a lot more. People want to say, well, I don't want to hear the evidence. That's fine. You can do that if you want to, but don't act like this stuff isn't happening. We're telling you that it is, and it's important stuff. It's important to be aware.
There's reports, there's cases. If this gentleman who went on Vic Kunda's show can find it, I'm sure anybody could. They could look up the police reports and everything to see. Like you said, most of them make the news, whether it be local. The one lady in North Carolina made national news.
Right.
So, I mean, yeah, what we're talking about is happening. We think because of the footprints and the unknown canine DNA that they're finding at the scenes, we're tying it into cryptids and Dogman, but you don't have to. If you don't want to believe that, that's fine. But these things are happening. These attacks,
real people,
right? Real people and real attacks, and they are happening. So there's reports out there about it. If you want to do your own research, and hey, if you think we're wrong, then come to your own conclusions. We're just trying to propose what we think is happening.
Right.
But anyway, thank you for listening. We don't always talk about cryptids on this channel, and we do get into some more biblical and godly things. If you'd like to come back and check some of that stuff out, we also have a lot of videos that are already out there if you want to go back and watch some of those. But we appreciate you listening, and thanks for tuning in. God bless.